The forgotten shepherd appeared like a ghost at the edge of the Thompson property, his once proud frame now a collection of jutting bones and matted fur. 7-year-old Lily froze, sandwich clutched in her tiny hand, as the dog's amber eyes locked with hers across the sun-baked yard. Something ancient passed between them, a recognition that transcended words. The next morning, urgent scratching jolted the household awake before dawn. When Bob Thompson yanked open the front door, the massive German shepherd stood resolute on their porch, sides heaving with exhaustion. But it wasn't the dog's unexpected return that made Martha gasp. It was what lay at its feet, a mud-caked wallet, and beside it, something that stopped Bob's heart cold, a bloodied scrap of floral fabric, hauntingly identical to the blouse Jessica had worn the day of the accident. How could this stray dog have found the one thing that would finally break little Lily's silence and potentially unravel the mystery that had haunted their small Arizona town for over a year? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Thompson Ranch sat on the outskirts of Copper Creek, Arizona, where the desert reluctantly surrendered to patches of stubborn vegetation. It wasn't much a weathered 2-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch, a small barn, and enough land to remind you that neighbors existed only in theory. For Robert Bob Thompson and his wife Martha, this modest spread had been their retirement dream. Now it served as a sanctuary for their only granddaughter, though sanctuary felt like the wrong word for a place that couldn't protect Lily from her own silence. At 65, Bob Thompson's hands bore the calluses of a man who'd spent 40 years tending to animals. The former veterinarian still carried himself with the straight-backed dignity of someone who'd seen both birth and death in equal measure. Though lately, the lines around his eyes had deepened. His granddaughter's mutism weighed on him like a physical burden. "Never seen anything like it," he'd confide to Martha late at night. "Animals communicate when they're hurting. Lily's just gone somewhere I can't follow." Martha Thompson had the patient eyes of her 30 years as an elementary school teacher. At 63, her silver hair was always neatly pinned back, a habit from decades of classroom management. She maintained structure in their lives with almost desperate precision, meals at exact times, bedtime stories even when Lily wouldn't respond, and the weekly drive to Dr. Miller's office, where the child psychologist tried everything to coax a word from the little girl's lips. Lily Thompson had turned 7 last month, though they'd barely been able to get her to blow out her candles. Her mother's death, the accident, as everyone in town carefully called it, had stolen more than Jessica Thompson from the world. It had swallowed Lily's voice, replacing it with a vacant stare that focused somewhere beyond what the rest of them could see. The only animation that remained was her attachment to her mother's photograph, a worn print she carried everywhere, sleeping with it clutched to her chest. The local authorities, led by Sheriff Jim Parker, had long since closed the case on Jessica's death. Car accident. Tragic. The young widow had apparently lost control on Canyon Road, her vehicle discovered at the bottom of a steep ravine. Case closed, despite Bob's persistent questions about certain details that never quite added up. That was their world until the German shepherd limped into their lives, carrying secrets none of them were prepared to face. The midday Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as Lily wandered to the edge of her grandparents' property. June had arrived with a vengeance, turning the landscape into a shimmering mirage of heat and dust. Martha had insisted Lily eat lunch outside on the porch. "Get some fresh air, sweetheart." but the sandwich remained mostly untouched on her plate, the crust meticulously torn into tiny pieces. That's when she saw him, a large dog watching her from the shadow of a mesquite tree near the fence line. Even from a distance, Lily could see his ribs pressing against his dull coat. The German shepherd's ears perked forward as their eyes met, but he made no move to approach. There was something about his stillness that reminded Lily of herself present, but not really there. Lilybean, don't wander too far. Her grandfather's voice carried from the barn where he was fixing an old tractor. He had warned her about desert strays, coyotes, feral dogs, but this animal didn't look dangerous. He looked lost. With a furtive glance toward the barn, Lily slipped the remaining half of her peanut butter sandwich off the plate. The thought of her grandmother's reaction to feeding a stray barely registered as she moved cautiously toward the fence. The sandwich extended in her small hand. She stopped several yards from the boundary, placed the offering on the ground, and backed away. The dog watched her retreat, his head cocked slightly as if puzzled by her behavior. Minutes passed in a silent standoff before hunger overrode caution. He approached the fence with military precision alert, assessing, each step deliberate. Despite his emaciated state, there was unmistakable dignity in his movement, even with the noticeable limp in his right hind leg. He paused at the fence, nostrils flaring as he caught the scent of peanut butter. His amber eyes never left Lily's face as he slipped underneath a loose section of wire. The distance between them closed with each tentative step. For the first time in a year, Lily didn't feel the urge to retreat from another living creature. She remained perfectly still as the dog gently took the sandwich from the ground, consuming it in 3 careful bites. Up close, she could see the scars, a jagged line across his muzzle, a patch of missing fur on his shoulder revealing pink, healed skin beneath. The dog finished eating and did something unexpected. Instead of turning away, he sat down, just an arm's length from Lily, and continued to study her. His gaze held none of the pity she'd grown to recognize in adults' eyes. There was only a steady, knowing awareness that made her feel strangely seen. "Lily, where are you? Honey?" Bob's voice broke the spell. The dog's ears flattened briefly before he rose in one fluid motion and slipped back under the fence. He paused once on the other side, looking back at Lily with what almost seemed like regret, before disappearing into the brush. "There you are." Bob approached, wiping greasy hands on a rag. "What are you looking at out there?" He followed her gaze to the empty landscape. "Just jackrabbits and lizards, I expect. Come on back to the house before your grandmother thinks you've wandered to Mexico." That night, for the first time since the accident, Lily dreamed of her mother. Not the frightening fragments that usually jolted her awake, twisted metal and screaming brakes, but her mother smiling, kneeling beside a large dog with knowing amber eyes. In the dream, Jessica Thompson whispered something to the dog, who turned to look directly at Lily. She woke with tears on her cheeks but couldn't remember why. The scratching began before dawn, insistent and purposeful. Bob, already dressed for his morning chores, was the first to hear it. Years of pre-dawn veterinary emergencies had conditioned him to wake at the slightest unusual sound. "Probably a raccoon," he muttered, grabbing the flashlight he kept by the bedside. Martha stirred but didn't wake as he made his way downstairs. The scratching continued, clearly coming from the front door. Bob flicked on the porch light and peered through the side window, half expecting to see one of the neighbor's cats. The beam of his flashlight instead illuminated the German Shepherd, sitting at attention on their welcome mat. "Well, I'll be—" Bob's exclamation trailed off as he noticed what lay at the dog's feet. Something muddy and misshapen that looked like a wallet. And beside it, a small scrap of fabric, darkened with what looked disturbingly like dried blood. The dog's posture was almost formal, like a soldier delivering a report. His eyes, intelligent and intent, met Bob's through the window with an unmistakable message. "I've brought you something important." Bob hesitated only briefly before turning the doorknob. Some instinct deeper than caution told him this moment mattered. As the door swung open, he found himself face to face with a mystery that had arrived on 4 paws, carrying secrets that would soon shatter the fragile peace of their broken family. Bob Thompson knelt on the porch, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he reached for the mud-caked wallet. The German Shepherd watched intently, maintaining a respectful distance but showing no intention of leaving. In the early morning light, Bob could see the military-style tags still hanging from the dog's collar, though they were too dirty to read properly. "What have you got here?" "Boy," he murmured, turning the wallet over. Caked mud flaked off as he carefully pried it open. Inside, protected by the leather, a water-damaged but still legible military ID card stared back at him. "Thomas Walker," Bob read aloud. "K9 Division." The photo showed a young man in uniform with a crew cut and serious eyes. Something about the name tickled at Bob's memory, but he couldn't place it. Behind the ID was a folded photograph, creased but intact. Bob's breath caught as he unfolded it. The same young man stood proudly beside a German Shepherd, unmistakably the same dog now sitting on his porch. "Ranger," read the handwritten caption. "Best partner a man could ask for." A soft gasp made Bob turn. Lily stood in the doorway, still in her nightgown, clutching her mother's photograph. Her eyes were fixed not on Bob or the wallet, but on the dog. For the first time in months, her expression held something other than emptiness, a spark of recognition, perhaps even hope. "Lily Bean, go on inside now," Bob said gently. "I need to make a call." But Lily didn't move. Instead, she took a tentative step toward the dog, her hand extended. The German Shepherd's tail swept once across the porch, a restrained greeting. His posture remained dignified, but his eyes softened as the child approached. Martha appeared behind Lily, her robe hastily tied. "Bob, what on earth?" She stopped short at the sight of the dog. "Is that a stray? You know it's not safe to—" "He's not just any stray, Martha," Bob interrupted, holding up the wallet. "And I think we'd better call Jim Parker." Sheriff Parker arrived 40 minutes later, squad car kicking up dust as it rolled down the long driveway. By then, Bob had coaxed the dog into the fenced backyard with a bowl of water and leftover meatloaf. The animal accepted the offerings graciously but remained alert, his attention repeatedly returning to Lily, who watched him through the kitchen window with unprecedented focus. "So you're saying this dog just showed up on your doorstep with a dead man's wallet?" Sheriff Parker scratched his gray stubbled chin, examining the ID. "And this piece of fabric?" You think it looks like Jessica's blouse? Martha wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself. It's been a year, Jim. How could a dog possibly? It's not just any dog, Bob insisted. Look at those tags. He handed the sheriff a magnifying glass he'd used to examine the dog's collar. I cleaned them up while waiting for you. Sheriff Parker squinted through the glass. Military issue. All right. Serial number. Hell. This is an active duty tag. He looked up sharply. This dog is government property. Bob, Ranger, service number K97734, assigned to... He paused, referring back to the wallet. Thomas Walker. Now I remember there was a training accident at Fort Huachuca about 6 months back. Handler killed. Dog went missing. They had search parties out for weeks. Fort Huachuca. Martha's voice tightened. That's where Jessica did administrative work part-time. The sheriff's expression changed. That can't be coincidence. Nothing about this feels like coincidence, Bob said quietly, watching Lily through the window as she pressed her small palm against the glass, her eyes never leaving the dog. Sheriff Parker made several calls from his car radio, speaking in the clipped, official tones that reminded Bob of the day they'd been notified about Jessica's accident. When he returned, his face was grim. Military police are sending someone over. This dog ranger was part of a specialized unit. They've been looking for him since the incident. He hesitated. They seemed mighty interested that he turned up here, of all places. They're not taking him, Bob said flatly, surprising himself with the force of his conviction. Not until we understand what he's trying to tell us about Jessica. Bob, the sheriff sighed. We can't know that's what... Grandpa. The small voice froze everyone in the kitchen. Lily stood in the doorway to the backyard, her expression uncertain but determined. It was the first word she had spoken since the funeral. Did she just... Martha's hand flew to her mouth. Lily pointed to the dog visible through the door. Not Ranger, she said, her voice rusty from disuse. Max. Bob knelt before his granddaughter, heart hammering in his chest. What did you say? Lily Bean? His name is Max. Lily repeated with the absolute certainty only a child could muster. He told me... The adults exchanged glances. Sheriff Parker cleared his throat. Lily, honey, how do you know his name is Max? Lily just shook her head, pressing her lips together as if she'd already said too much. She turned and walked with deliberate steps to the back door, sliding it open before anyone could stop her. The German Shepherd Ranger, or Max, watched her approach, his posture alert but gentle. I think we should let them be for a moment, Bob said, placing a restraining hand on Martha's arm as she moved to intercept Lily. Look at how he's responding to her. Outside, Lily had stopped a few feet from the dog. She held out her hand, palm up, waiting. The shepherd approached slowly, sniffed her hand, then pressed his muzzle gently against it. Something passed between them, a communication the adults couldn't interpret but was clearly meaningful to both child and dog. This is getting mighty peculiar, Sheriff Parker muttered. I've never seen a military working dog behave like that with a stranger. Maybe they're not strangers, Bob suggested quietly. Jess worked at the base. Maybe she knew the handler, knew the dog. That still doesn't explain how it found your place, or why it's bringing you these items. A black SUV appeared on the horizon, dust billowing behind it as it approached the ranch. Sheriff Parker straightened his uniform shirt. "That'll be the military police. Bob, I'd suggest you get Lily inside." But when they turned back to the yard, both Lily and the dog were gone. "Lily!" Martha cried out, rushing to the door. "Lily Bean!" The backyard was empty, the gate to the desert beyond standing open. In the distance, they could just make out a small figure and a large dog moving quickly across the scrubland toward the canyon that had claimed Jessica Thompson's life 1 year before. 3 days passed with no sign of Max. The military officials had been surprisingly understanding about the situation, particularly Captain Frank Reynolds, who had been Thomas Walker's commanding officer. After examining the property and the items the dog had brought, he'd agreed to suspend the official search for the missing canine temporarily. That dog survived 6 months in the wild, he'd told Bob and Martha. "He's clearly on some kind of mission. I've never seen anything like it in 20 years of working with military dogs." His weathered face had softened when he spoke of Walker. Tom was special, had a way with animals that bordered on supernatural. If his dog is bringing you evidence about your daughter's accident, well, I've learned not to dismiss unusual behavior from these animals. Still, the waiting was agony. Martha had barely slept, keeping vigil by the window overlooking the back gate. Bob maintained a stoic facade, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed his worry. Lily had retreated back into silence after being found just a quarter-mile from the property. She'd refused to explain why she'd left with Max, or where the dog had gone, responding to questions by curling into herself, eyes fixed on the horizon as if waiting. Sheriff Parker had expanded his patrols to include regular drive-bys of the Thompson property. "Just keeping an eye out," he'd said, though Bob suspected Jim felt responsible for having brought the military to their doorstep. On the morning of the 4th day, Martha's scream brought Bob running from the barn. He found his wife on the back porch, hand pressed to her mouth, staring at Max. The German shepherd stood at attention by the gate, thinner than before but otherwise unharmed. At his feet lay a torn piece of fabric larger than the first, unmistakably from a woman's blouse. Its floral pattern faded but recognizable. "Jessica wore that pattern," Martha whispered as Bob approached cautiously. "The day she—" Her voice broke. Bob knelt to examine the fabric, careful not to touch it. "We need to call Jim," he said quietly. "This is evidence now." Max watched them with that unnerving intelligence, his amber eyes tracking every movement. When the back door opened and Lily appeared, his entire demeanor changed. His tail swept once across the dirt, and he lowered his muzzle in what looked almost like a bow. Lily walked straight to Max without hesitation, her small hand coming to rest on his massive head. For the first time in a year, the ghost of a smile touched her lips. "He found Mommy," she said simply. Sheriff Parker arrived with the evidence kit and a troubled expression. "This matches the description of what Jessica was wearing," he confirmed after examining the fabric. "But Bob, her remains were recovered. The accident scene was processed." "Maybe not thoroughly enough," Bob suggested, watching as Lily sat in the grass beside Max, her hand buried in his fur. The dog hadn't left her side since returning. "Jim, you know I never bought the accident story. Jessica was too careful a driver. That road—" "I know your concerns," Jim interrupted gently. "But we had no evidence of foul play." "Until now," Martha said firmly, gesturing toward the fabric. "That dog is trying to tell us something about our daughter." Jim looked at Max thoughtfully. "I've seen cadaver dogs, search and rescue, nothing like this." He knelt to Lily's level. "Honey, do you know where Max found this?" Lily nodded solemnly. "Can you tell me?" She shook her head, then pointed at Max and made a walking motion with her fingers. "I think she means he'll show us." Bob interpreted. "Like before." "This is highly irregular," Jim muttered. But he was already reaching for his radio. "Let me call the station. Let them know I'll be out of contact for a bit." An hour later, a small expedition set out from the Thompson Ranch. Bob insisted on driving his old Jeep rather than riding in the sheriff's cruiser. Max sat in the back with Lily, his posture alert as he gazed through the windshield, occasionally making soft whining sounds when they needed to turn. "It's like having a furry GPS," Jim remarked as they followed a dirt road deeper into the canyonlands. "I've never seen anything like it." "He understands more than he should," Bob agreed. Navigating the increasingly rough terrain. "Did the military tell you anything about his training?" Jim shook his head. "Captain Reynolds was polite but tight-lipped. Just said Ranger Max was part of a specialized unit. Reading between the lines, I'd guess they were involved in some classified operations." They drove for nearly an hour, the landscape growing more rugged. Eventually, Max began to grow agitated, pawing at the window and whining. "I think we need to stop here," Bob said, pulling the Jeep to the side of the barely discernible track. "The rest might be on foot." As soon as the doors opened, Max leapt out and waited for Lily, who climbed down carefully. The dog looked at her, then at the adults, before turning toward a narrow game trail leading away from the road. "Should I carry her?" Jim asked, eyeing the rough path. "No," Bob replied, watching his granddaughter follow the dog with newfound confidence. "I think she needs to do this herself." The trail wound through scrub brush and around massive boulders, gradually descending into a ravine that didn't appear on any of the maps Jim had brought. Max moved with purpose, occasionally looking back to ensure they were following. Lily kept one hand lightly touching his back, her face set in concentration. "This isn't anywhere near where we found Jessica's car," Jim said quietly, scanning the unfamiliar terrain. "We're at least 5 miles southwest of the accident site." Bob nodded grimly. "Exactly." After 20 minutes of hiking, the ravine widened into a small canyon. Max stopped abruptly, his posture tense. He growled a low, warning rumble that raised the hair on Bob's neck. "What is it?" "Boy," Bob asked, moving closer to Lily. Max looked at them, then deliberately walked toward a pile of boulders at the canyon's edge. He began to dig at the sandy soil beneath them, his powerful paws sending dirt flying. Jim approached cautiously. "What's he doing?" "Finding something," Bob said, watching as Max's digging revealed a glint of metal. "There. What is that?" Jim knelt beside the hole, using a pen from his pocket to carefully brush away more soil. His sharp intake of breath confirmed Bob's suspicion that this was significant. "It's a side mirror," Jim said, his voice tight. "From a car. Recently buried." "Jessica's car?" Martha asked, her voice barely audible. Jim shook his head. "No. Her vehicle was a blue sedan. This is from something larger, maybe an SUV or truck." He continued to clear dirt away, revealing more fragments of automotive debris. "This isn't just a mirror. There are pieces of a headlight, part of a bumper. There was another vehicle involved." The implications hung heavy in the air. If another vehicle had been involved in Jessica's accident, a vehicle that was never reported, the official conclusion of a single-car accident was wrong. Max wasn't finished. He moved 20 feet away and began digging again, this time unearthing something that made Sheriff Parker curse under his breath. A woman's purse, partially deteriorated from exposure but still recognizable. "That's Jessica's," Martha gasped. "I gave her that purse for Christmas." Jim carefully extracted the purse using an evidence bag from his pocket. "This location was never searched," he said, his professional demeanor cracking. "This changes everything, Bob." Lily tugged at Bob's sleeve, pointing further along the canyon floor where Max was now investigating a rocky overhang. When they caught up, the dog was pawing gently at a crevice in the rock face. Bob shone his flashlight into the gap and felt his heart stutter. Wedged into the crevice was a cell phone, its case unmistakably decorated with the sea turtles Jessica had loved so much. "Her phone was never recovered," Jim said unnecessarily, already pulling on evidence gloves. "We assumed it was destroyed in the crash." As Jim carefully extracted the phone, Max sat back on his haunches, watching them with what Bob could only interpret as satisfaction. Lily knelt beside the dog, her small arms wrapping around his neck in a fierce hug. "Thank you," she whispered into his fur, loud enough for the adults to hear. "Thank you for finding Mommy's things." The drive back to the ranch was subdued, each adult lost in their own thoughts. Jim had called for a forensic team to process the new site, and Captain Reynolds had been notified of the developments. The phone and purse were secured in evidence bags in the sheriff's cruiser. "This is going to be a whole new investigation," Jim said as they pulled up to the Thompson house. "I can't believe we missed this." "You didn't miss it," Bob replied. "You were led to the wrong location deliberately. The question is, by whom?" Inside. Lily had begun to communicate through nods and gestures, though she spoke only to Max. The bond between them had grown visibly stronger with each passing hour. The dog shadowed her every movement, his vigilance unwavering. That evening, as Bob was preparing dinner, the phone rang. Martha answered, her expression shifting from polite inquiry to confusion. "Hello, hello." She frowned. "That's the third hang-up call today." Bob moved to the window, scanning the property with sudden unease. "Maybe we should ask Jim to park a deputy here tonight." "You think someone knows what Max found?" Martha's voice dropped to a whisper, glancing toward the living room where Lily was curled up against Max's side, looking at a picture book. "I think we need to be careful," Bob replied. 2 days later, Captain Frank Reynolds arrived with a thick folder and a grim expression. Sheriff Parker joined them at the kitchen table while Lily napped upstairs, Max standing guard by her bed. "I've been doing some digging," Reynolds said, opening the folder. "Thomas Walker wasn't killed in a training accident. That was the official story we gave the press." He pushed a photograph across the table, a younger, smiling Walker in uniform standing beside Max. "Walker was investigating security contractors who were working at Fort Huachuca. We had reports of illegal weapons testing, unauthorized sales." Walker was close to something big when he disappeared. Disappeared, Jim echoed. I thought you said he was killed. Reynolds's jaw tightened. His body was found in the desert with a bullet in his head. The department ruled it suicide, but those of us who knew him never believed it. Max was with him that day, returned to base with blood on his coat. Not all of it Walker's. He was injured, agitated. After treatment, he was scheduled for evaluation, but he escaped the kennel that night. We've been looking for him ever since. And Jessica? Bob asked, his voice strained. What does this have to do with my daughter? She worked in the administrative office that processed contractor credentials, Reynolds said quietly. 3 weeks before her accident. She filed an irregular activity report. Nothing came of it officially. But he hesitated. Walker was seen speaking with her twice that week. The implications settled over the table like a shroud. You think they were killed by the same people? Martha whispered, her hand finding Bob's under the table. Reynolds didn't answer directly. I think Max is the only witness to both events, and now he's brought you evidence that connects them. Why now? Jim asked. It's been a year since Jessica's death, 6 months since Walker's. Dogs process grief differently than humans, Reynolds replied. And Max was injured, surviving in the wild. It's possible something triggered his training recently, a scent. A sound. He looked toward the stairs. Or maybe he recognized something of Jessica in your granddaughter. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a vehicle approaching. Jim moved to the window, hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. Military vehicle, he reported. Official markings. Reynolds frowned. I didn't request backup. The tension dissolved slightly when the visitor turned out to be a military veterinarian sent to check on Max's condition. Dr. Abigail Foster was a brisk, efficient woman in her 40s who softened visibly when she saw the bond between Lily and the dog. His physical condition is remarkably good, considering, she reported after her examination. The old injuries have healed well, though he'll always have that limp. He's underweight, but not critically so. She packed her equipment with practiced movements. What's most remarkable is his behavior. Military working dogs like Max are typically aloof with strangers, bonded only to their handlers. This level of attachment to a child is unusual. But healthy? Martha asked anxiously. Doctor? Foster smiled. I'd say therapeutic for both of them. She hesitated. Captain Reynolds briefed me on the situation. I've worked with Max since he was selected for the program. He was always special intuitive beyond his training. Walker used to joke that Max understood English better than some of the recruits. As the adults talked, no one noticed the headlights briefly illuminating the side of the house as a vehicle slowed on the distant road, or the flash of reflection from binoculars in the gathering dusk. That night, Max began exhibiting strange behavior. He paced restlessly between Lily's bedroom and the windows, occasionally emitting low growls at seemingly nothing. Bob found himself checking the locks twice before bed, the unease from earlier returning stronger than before. In the morning, Max was gone again. Lily's bedroom window was open, the screen carefully removed and propped against the wall. A note in childish handwriting lay on her pillow. Max needs to find something. Don't worry. The household erupted into frantic activity. Sheriff Parker organized search parties, while Reynolds called in military resources. Martha alternated between tearful worry and fierce anger at herself for not hearing anything during the night. "She's never opened that window before," she kept saying. "She's afraid of heights." "She's not afraid when Max is with her," Bob replied, trying to remain calm while fear clawed at his insides. "She trusts him." The search stretched into the afternoon with no sign of either Lily or Max. Helicopters scanned the canyon lands while deputies and volunteers combed the property. Bob found himself standing in Lily's room, searching for any clue they might have missed. The photograph of Jessica that Lily carried everywhere was gone, expected, as she never went anywhere without it. But something else was missing too, the wallet Max had brought them, which had been kept in a drawer of Lily's nightstand. Bob had given it to her after the military had processed it for evidence, a connection to the dog who had changed their lives. The sound of a vehicle approaching at high speed drew Bob to the window. A dust cloud billowed behind Sheriff Parker's cruiser as it skidded to a halt in the yard. Jim leapt out, expression urgent as he waved for Bob to come down. "We found something," he called as Bob hurried onto the porch. Max came back to the canyon site where we found Jessica's things. Deputy Wilson spotted him digging in a new location. When he approached, Max ran off, but look what he uncovered. Jim held up an evidence bag containing a military dog tag, not Max's, but another. "That's not Walker's," Reynolds said, examining the tag. "It belongs to Michael Reeves. He was in Walker's unit." Bob caught the past tense immediately. "Reeves went AWOL 3 months before Walker's death," Reynolds explained. "We assumed he'd deserted, but Walker never believed it. He was investigating Reeves's disappearance unofficially when he died. So now we have 2 missing military personnel and my daughter, all connected to this contractor investigation," Bob said, the pieces falling into terrible alignment in his mind. "And my granddaughter is out there somewhere with the only witness." "I've called in additional resources," Reynolds said grimly. "We're treating this as a critical situation now." The sun was beginning to set when Max returned alone and injured. Martha spotted him first, a limping shadow approaching the back gate. His right shoulder bore a fresh wound, blood matting the fur. "Where's Lily?" she cried as Bob rushed to the dog's side. "Where is she?" Max whined, turning to look back the way he had come before collapsing at Bob's feet. Bob carried the injured dog inside, laying him on the kitchen floor where Dr. Foster, who had remained at the ranch during the search, immediately began treatment. "It's a bullet graze," she reported, cleaning the wound. "Recent. Someone shot at him." The implications chilled the room. Max hadn't simply wandered off with Lily, they had encountered someone armed and dangerous. "He came back for help," Reynolds said, watching the dog's eyes track everyone in the room despite his exhaustion. "He wouldn't have left Lily unless he had to," as if confirming this assessment. Max struggled to his feet as soon as Dr. Foster finished bandaging him, moving unsteadily toward the door. "He wants us to follow him," Bob said, already reaching for his jacket. "Like before." "You're not going alone," Jim said firmly. "I'm calling in every available deputy." "There's no time," Bob insisted. "It'll be dark soon. If Max is this desperate, Lily must be in danger now." The compromise was a small team, Bob, Sheriff Parker, Captain Reynolds, and 2 deputies. Max led them with determined focus despite his injury, setting a pace that had them jogging to keep up. Unlike before, he didn't head toward the canyon, but northwest, toward an area of abandoned mining operations that dotted the mountains. "The old Sawyer claim," Jim panted as they followed Max up a steep trail. "Been deserted for 30 years. Max paused at a fork in the trail, his posture suddenly alert. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Reynolds signaled for everyone to stop, drawing his sidearm. "Someone's up there," he whispered. The sound of an engine starting echoed from above. Max barked once, sharp and urgent, then bolted up the right-hand path. The humans followed, guns drawn, fear giving them speed. They emerged into a small clearing where a dilapidated cabin stood, its door hanging open. Tire tracks led away from a crude parking area, still fresh in the dirt. "Lily!" Bob shouted, racing toward the cabin. "Lily Bean!" A small sound from inside froze his blood. Not Lily's voice, but a whimper pain or fear. He couldn't tell. Max pushed past him, disappearing into the dark interior. Sheriff Parker's flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing a scene that would haunt Bob's nightmares. Lily lay curled in the corner, eyes wide with terror. Beside her, a man in civilian clothes was slumped against the wall, blood staining his shirt. Max stood between them, his body shielding Lily, teeth bared at the injured man. "Grandpa," Lily's voice came out as a sob. "He tried to take me away. Max bit him." Reynolds moved quickly to the wounded man, keeping his gun trained on him. "Michael Reeves," he said, recognition in his voice. "We thought you were dead." "Might as well be," the man grunted, clutching his bloody arm. "They'll kill me now that the girl found me." "Who will?" Jim demanded, handcuffing the injured man. Reeves laughed hollowly. "The same people who killed Walker. The same ones who ran that woman's car off the road when she started asking questions." His eyes found Lily. "She has her mother's face. I recognized her as soon as the dog brought her here. Knew then I was finished." As Reynolds and the deputies secured Reeves and called for backup, Bob gathered Lily into his arms. "Why did you go with Max? Lily Bean, you scared us half to death." Lily's small hand reached out to touch Max's head. The dog had collapsed beside them, exhaustion finally overtaking his vigilance now that Lily was safe. "He saw the bad man watching our house," she explained simply. "He needed to show me who hurt Mommy." "How did you know the man hurt your mother?" Bob asked gently. Lily's expression darkened. "He had Mommy's bracelet, the one with the little turtles. He was wearing it on his backpack." She pointed to a battered rucksack in the corner. "Max smelled it. That's how he knew." Sheriff Parker retrieved the backpack, finding a small sea turtle charm attached to the zipper, the broken piece of a bracelet that had indeed belonged to Jessica. As they prepared to leave, Lily insisted on walking beside Max rather than being carried. The dog, despite his injury and exhaustion, stayed pressed against her side. Together they led the procession down the mountain, 2 wounded souls who had somehow found strength in each other. That night, as emergency vehicles and investigators swarmed the Thompson property, Lily finally broke her long silence. sitting on the porch steps with Max's head in her lap. She looked up at her grandparents with clear eyes. "Mom saw something bad," she said quietly. "The bad men hurt her car. She told me to be brave before we fell." A single tear slid down her cheek. "I wasn't brave. I stopped talking." Martha knelt beside her. "Oh, sweetheart, you were the bravest of all. You waited until Max could help you tell the truth." Lily nodded solemnly, her fingers gently stroking the dog's scarred muzzle. "He was alone, too, but not anymore." She looked up at Bob with a certainty beyond her years. "He's staying with us forever now. Right, Grandpa?" Before Bob could answer, Max raised his head and licked Lily's cheek once, the gesture so tender it brought tears to the old veterinarian's eyes. "Yes, Lily Bean," he managed through the tightness in his throat. "Max is home now." The investigation expanded rapidly over the next 3 days. The Thompson Ranch became the center of an operation that involved not just local law enforcement, but military investigators, and even 2 FBI agents who arrived in matching dark SUVs. Through it all, Max remained Lily's constant shadow, his vigilance unwavering despite his healing wound. Michael Reeves, once treated for the bite wounds Max had inflicted, began cooperating with authorities. Captain Reynolds spent hours in interrogation rooms, emerging with grim satisfaction as the full picture slowly took shape. The private security contractors Walker had been investigating, Centaur Strategic Services, had been testing weapons beyond their clearance level and selling surplus military equipment on the black market. Jessica stumbled onto their shipping records. Reynolds explained to Bob and Martha over coffee at the kitchen table, his voice low to prevent Lily from overhearing. She noticed discrepancies in the inventory logs, items being signed out but never returned. When she filed that report, she unknowingly put herself on their radar. "And Walker?" Bob asked, glancing toward the living room where Lily was reading a book to Max, her small finger tracing the words as the dog watched with apparent interest. He connected the dots after Jessica's accident. Reeves had already gone missing after questioning some of the contractors directly. Walker suspected foul play and started his own investigation. Reynolds shook his head. He was close to gathering enough evidence when they ambushed him in the desert. Max was with him, tried to protect him, got shot in the process. Martha's hand covered her mouth. That poor animal. No wonder he recognized something in Lily. Trauma recognizes trauma, Reynolds said quietly. And there's something else. Jessica Thompson was the last person Walker spoke to before he died. According to his phone records, they had a 20-minute conversation the morning of his death. Bob's eyes closed briefly, imagining his daughter's final days, the danger she hadn't recognized until too late. She must have told him something important enough to get them both killed. Reynolds agreed grimly. The pieces were falling into place. But the masterminds behind the operation remained elusive. Reeves could identify only mid-level operators, the men who had carried out the murders, but not those who had ordered them. The contractors maintained a firewall between operations and management, ensuring deniability for those at the top. What they needed was concrete evidence connecting Centaur's leadership to the crimes. Without it, the case would stall with only the foot soldiers facing justice. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Dr. Miller, Lily's psychologist, had continued her regular sessions at the ranch, amazed by the progress the child had made since Max's arrival. During one session, as Lily drew pictures of her mother, she mentioned something that made the doctor pause. Lily said her mother had hidden something important where the fish never stopped swimming. Dr. Miller reported to Bob afterward. She says Max knows where it is, but he's waiting for the right time to show them. Bob shared this cryptic message with Sheriff Parker and Captain Reynolds, who puzzled over its meaning. Jessica wasn't much for fishing, Bob said, but she loved the aquarium in Tucson, took Lily there at least once a month. The aquarium has a continuous circular tank for their reef exhibit, Reynolds mused. Fish that never stop swimming. They arranged a visit to the Tucson Desert Aquarium the next day, bringing Lily and Max along. The facility's director had been skeptical about allowing a dog inside until Captain Reynolds explained the unusual circumstances. Even then, Max's entry was contingent on a military working dog certification and a promise that he would remain leashed. The moment they entered the building, Max's behavior changed. His nose lifted, sampling the air, and he began pulling gently but insistently toward the reef exhibit. Lily followed eagerly, her hand resting on his back as if they were communicating silently. The circular tank dominated the center of the main hall, filled with brightly colored tropical fish that indeed swam in endless patterns through the artificial reef. Visitors could walk all the way around it or view it from below through a tunnel that passed beneath the massive tank. "Do you remember anything specific about this place, Lily Bean?" Bob asked as they circled the exhibit. "Did your mom have a favorite spot here?" Lily nodded, pointing to a bench positioned directly across from the information plaque. "We always sat there to eat our sandwiches. Mom said it had the best view." Reynolds examined the bench carefully, running his hands along the underside and sides. Nothing seemed unusual about it. A standard composite wood bench bolted to the floor. Max, however, was intensely interested in the wall behind the bench, sniffing along the baseboard with focused concentration. "There's something here," Reynolds said, kneeling to examine the wall more closely. "This section of baseboard looks slightly different." Sheriff Parker joined him, running his fingers along the molding. "It's not attached the same way as the rest." He pressed gently at one end, and to everyone's surprise, a small section popped loose, revealing a hollow space behind. Inside was a waterproof pouch containing a flash drive and a handwritten note in Jessica's distinctive script. "If you're finding this, I'm probably in trouble. Evidence of weapons testing and sales, contacts inside and outside Centaur. Send to Timothy Marshall at DOJ only. Trust no one else." Captain Reynolds stared at the flash drive with something approaching reverence. "This could be everything we need." The data on the flash drive exceeded their expectations. Jessica had meticulously documented not just inventory discrepancies, but email exchanges, meeting notes, and even surveillance photos she had taken during an off-site gathering of Centaur executives. Most damning were recorded conversations captured when she had left her phone running during meetings, conversations that explicitly implicated Centaur's CEO and operations director in both the illegal weapons testing and the plan to handle employees who asked too many questions. "Your daughter was braver than anyone knew," Reynolds told Bob and Martha after reviewing the evidence with federal prosecutors. "She knew the risks but kept gathering evidence anyway." "She was always stubborn that way," Martha said, tears in her eyes. Once Jessica believed something was wrong, she couldn't let it go. The evidence Jessica had gathered set in motion a cascade of events. Federal agents raided Centaur's offices, seizing computers and documents. Arrests were made, including the company's top executives. The media descended on the story, transforming a local tragedy into national news. Through it all, the Thompson family maintained their privacy, protecting Lily from the spotlight while she continued her remarkable recovery. Max remained by her side, his presence a constant comfort as she processed the truth about her mother's death and found her voice again. On a clear Tuesday morning, as the case against Centaur's leadership solidified, Captain Reynolds arrived at the ranch with Dr. Foster and a third military officer Bob didn't recognize. Their expressions were solemn as they asked to speak with the family. "There's a formal hearing scheduled regarding Max's status," Reynolds explained once they were settled in the living room. Lily sat on the floor beside Max, her arms wrapped protectively around his neck. As a military working dog, he remains government property. Technically, he should return to service or be officially retired and placed through proper channels. Bob felt his heart sink. They had all assumed, or perhaps hoped, that Max would simply stay with them, that his extraordinary actions had somehow exempted him from standard protocols. "Colonel Harris here," Reynolds indicated the stern-faced officer, "is the final authority on K-9 disposition for the branch. He's reviewed the case and will make the determination." Colonel Harris cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable under Lily's unwavering stare. Military working dogs represent a significant investment of training and resources. The standard procedure would be to evaluate the animal for return to service or, if deemed unsuitable, placement with a handler experienced in managing dogs with specialized training. "Max belongs with Lily," Martha said firmly, her teacher's voice brooking no argument. "Anyone with eyes can see that. With all due respect, ma'am, these decisions aren't based on emotional attachments." The colonel replied, "These are working animals with specific needs and—" "May I speak, sir?" Dr. Foster interrupted, surprising everyone. The veterinarian had been quietly observing until now. "As the medical officer responsible for Max's care throughout his service, I believe I can offer relevant perspective." The colonel nodded reluctantly. Max suffered significant trauma, both physical and psychological, during the incident that claimed Handler Walker's life. Dr. Foster began, her professional tone belied by the compassion in her eyes. "In my medical opinion, he is unsuitable for return to active duty. The standard protocol for such cases would indeed be placement with an experienced handler." She paused, glancing at Lily and Max. "However, this case is unprecedented. Max's behavior seeking out Jessica Thompson's family, gathering evidence, protecting Lily demonstrates a level of purpose and healing that contradicts all established patterns for traumatized working dogs. In fact, his bond with Lily Thompson represents the most successful rehabilitation case I've ever witnessed." Dr. Foster turned directly to the colonel. "Separating them now would not only be cruel but would likely trigger regression in both the child and the dog. From a medical standpoint, I must formally recommend that Max be officially retired and placed permanently with the Thompson family, with regular veterinary follow-ups to ensure his continued well-being." The room fell silent as the colonel considered this. His gaze moved from the veterinarian to Captain Reynolds, who gave a slight nod, then finally to Lily and Max. The dog met his eyes with that unnerving intelligence, while Lily's expression remained resolute. "Young lady," the colonel addressed Lily directly, "what would you say if I asked you why this dog should stay with you instead of going back to help other soldiers?" Lily's answer came without hesitation, her voice clear and strong. "Max already completed his mission, sir. He found my mom's killers like he promised. Now he's teaching me to be brave again." Her small hand rested on the dog's scarred head. "We fixed each other. We belong together." Something in the colonel's stern demeanor softened. He straightened, assuming a formal posture that seemed almost ceremonial. "Based on the evidence and expert testimony, I am authorizing the immediate retirement of Military Working Dog Ranger, service number K9-7734, with honorable discharge for wounds sustained in the line of duty." He removed a document from his briefcase and signed it with deliberate strokes. "Furthermore, in recognition of extraordinary service beyond the call of duty, permanent placement with the Thompson family is approved, effective immediately." Lily's face transformed with joy as she buried her face in Max's fur. The dog's tail swept across the floor in broad, happy arcs. "There will be paperwork," the colonel continued, his official tone at odds with the smile tugging at his lips. "And the military veterinary service will continue to provide medical care as part of his retirement benefits. Captain Reynolds will be the liaison for any needs that arise." Bob extended his hand to the colonel. "Thank you, sir. We'll take good care of him." "I have no doubt of that. Mr. Thompson." The colonel's handshake was firm. "That dog has earned his retirement many times over." As the military officials prepared to leave, Lily approached Captain Reynolds with unexpected formality. "Thank you for helping Max find justice for my mom and Mr. Walker," she said, holding out her small hand just as her grandfather had done. Reynolds knelt to her level, accepting her handshake with matching solemnity. "Your mother and Walker were heroes. Lily. And so is Max." He glanced at the dog, who watched the exchange with attentive eyes. "Take good care of each other." After they departed, the Thompson family stood together on the porch, watching the dust settle on the driveway. Max sat at Lily's side, his posture relaxed but alert, a guardian at rest but ever vigilant. "Well," Bob said, his arm around Martha's shoulders, "I reckon we officially have a dog now." "We have more than that," Martha replied softly, watching as Lily whispered something in Max's ear that made his tail thump against the porch boards. "We have our family back." The approaching sound of another vehicle made Max's ears prick forward, but his posture remained calm. Sheriff Parker's cruiser appeared around the bend, followed by a news van that parked at a respectful distance. "Looks like Jim's keeping the reporters at bay," Bob observed. "We'll need to make some kind of statement eventually." "We will," Martha agreed. "But not today. Today is just for us." As the sun climbed higher, casting the ranch in golden morning light, Lily and Max descended the porch steps to greet Sheriff Parker. The dog moved with the easy confidence of one who had found his purpose, the limp in his stride barely noticeable as he matched his pace perfectly to the little girl by his side. The morning of the preliminary hearing dawned clear and hot, the kind of Arizona summer day where the heat shimmers above the asphalt and makes distant objects waver like mirages. Bob adjusted his tie, a concession to formality he rarely made, and checked his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at him seemed older somehow, the lines deeper, though only a month had passed since Max had come into their lives. "You about ready?" Martha called from the hallway. "We need to leave in 15 minutes to make it on time." "Almost," Bob replied, giving the tie one final adjustment. He wasn't looking forward to today. None of them were. The federal prosecutor had been adamant that Lily needed to make a statement about what she had witnessed in the moments before her mother's car went off the road. The child psychologist had agreed it was necessary for both the case and Lily's healing process. But that didn't make it any easier to subject his granddaughter to the sterile formality of a courtroom. In the kitchen, he found Martha packing a small cooler with water bottles and sandwiches. "It might be a long day," she explained unnecessarily. "And courthouse cafeterias charge an arm and a leg for a soggy sandwich." Bob nodded, placing a hand on her shoulder. "She'll be all right. Martha, Max will be with her." That had been their one non-negotiable condition. Max would accompany Lily during her testimony. The judge had eventually relented after Dr. Foster provided documentation of the dog's status as both a retired military working dog and an emotional support animal. The prosecutor had worried that Max's presence might distract from Lily's testimony, but Dr. Miller had been firm. Lily would speak more freely with Max beside her. "They're not ready," Martha said quietly, glancing toward the back porch where Lily sat with Max. "Neither of them." Bob followed her gaze. Through the screen door, he could see his granddaughter in her blue dress, the one she had insisted on wearing because "it makes me brave like Mommy," with Max sitting attentively beside her. Lily was speaking to the dog in low tones, her expression serious, her hand resting on his scarred head. "They're as ready as they'll ever be," Bob replied. "And they have each other." The drive to the federal courthouse in Tucson took just over an hour, the three of them quiet in the truck while Max sat in the back seat, his nose occasionally pressing against the window as if checking their surroundings. The media interest in the case had intensified as the extent of Centaur's operations became public. 4 senior executives now faced multiple charges, including conspiracy to commit murder. "Remember what Mr. Hayes told you," Martha said as they approached the courthouse, where news vans lined the street. "You don't have to talk to any reporters. Just look straight ahead and keep walking." "I remember, Grandma," Lily replied, her small voice steady despite the tension evident in her rigid posture. "Max will keep them away." As if understanding his role, Max pressed closer to Lily's side when they exited the vehicle. The dog's demeanor changed subtly as they approached the courthouse steps, his posture becoming more alert, his movements more deliberate. Bob recognized the shift. Max had entered what Captain Reynolds called his working mode. Federal prosecutor Andrew Hayes met them at a side entrance, away from the press, a tall man with prematurely silver hair and kind eyes. He had spent hours preparing Lily for this day, gradually earning her trust with his patient, straightforward manner. "Good morning, Lily," he greeted her, kneeling to her level. "Are you ready for today?" Lily nodded solemnly. "Max and I practiced what I'm going to say." Hayes smiled. "I'm sure he's an excellent listener." He rose, addressing Bob and Martha. The defense attorneys filed a last-minute motion to exclude Max from the courtroom, but Judge Winters overruled them. He's allowing a 15-minute recess before Lily's testimony so she can get comfortable with the environment. The courtroom was imposing with its high ceilings and dark wood paneling. Lily's hand tightened around Bob's as they entered. but her steps didn't falter. Max moved smoothly beside her, his eyes scanning the room in a way that reminded Bob of the dog's military training. When they reached the front row behind the prosecution's table, Lily finally spoke. "Where are the bad men?" she whispered to Hayes. The prosecutor pointed to the defense table where 4 men in expensive suits sat with their attorneys. "They can't hurt you or anyone else anymore, Lily. They're in custody. And there are marshals in the courtroom." Lily studied the men with an intensity that made Bob's chest ache. These were the people responsible for her mother's death, for the year of silence, for the nightmares that still sometimes woke her screaming. Max's low growl was almost inaudible, but Bob felt it through the leash he held. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though he understood the sentiment. When Judge Winters entered, the proceedings began with formal efficiency. Hayes presented the government's case methodically, outlining the evidence they had gathered from Jessica's hidden flash drive and Reeves's testimony. The defense attorneys objected frequently, their strategies clearly aimed at excluding as much evidence as possible. During a brief recess, Bob took Lily and Max outside to a small courtyard reserved for witnesses. The summer heat was oppressive, but Lily needed fresh air after the tension of the courtroom. As she walked Max around the perimeter of the space, Martha voiced the concern that had been growing in Bob's mind. "She seems too composed," she whispered. "It's not natural for a child her age to be so controlled." Bob nodded, watching as Lily knelt to say something in Max's ear. "She's holding it together for him," he replied. "She thinks she needs to be strong because he's protecting her." When they returned to the courtroom, Hayes informed them that Lily would be called after lunch. They sat through another hour of testimony from a financial investigator who detailed the money trail connecting Centaur to illegal weapons sales. The technical evidence was compelling, but bloodless numbers and transactions that couldn't convey the human cost of what these men had done. "The United States calls Lily Thompson," Judge Winters announced after they returned from the lunch break. The courtroom fell silent as Lily walked to the witness stand, Max at her side. The dog settled at her feet once she was seated, his body positioned between her and the defense table in what seemed like a deliberate choice. Hayes approached gently, establishing Lily's age and relationship to Jessica Thompson before moving to the difficult questions. "Lily, can you tell the court what happened on the day your mother's car went off the road?" Lily's voice was small but clear. "We were driving home from the aquarium. Mom was happy because she had finished her special project. She said we might have to take a trip soon, just for a little while, until some good people could help us. Did she seem worried or frightened?" "Not really, just serious." Lily's hand dropped to touch Max's head, drawing strength from his presence. Then she saw a black truck behind us. It was following too close, and Mom got scared. She told me to put my seatbelt on extra tight. Hayes nodded encouragingly. "What happened next?" "Lily, the truck hit us from behind, really hard." Lily's composure began to crack, her voice wavering. "Mom tried to keep the car on the road, but the truck hit us again. She told me she loved me and to be brave. Then we went through the guardrail." The courtroom remained utterly silent as Lily described the crash, the screech of metal, the terrifying sensation of falling. Her mother's body protecting her as the car rolled down the embankment. Tears streamed down her face now, but she continued speaking, determined to finish. "I couldn't wake Mom up after. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't seeing me. A sob escaped her. "I tried to be brave like she said, but I couldn't talk any more after that. I was too scared." Max whined softly, pressing closer to Lily's legs. One of the defense attorneys rose to object, claiming the dog was creating sympathy and influencing the witness. But Judge Winters silenced him with a stern look. "Did you see who was driving the truck, Lily?" Hayes asked gently. "Yes." Lily pointed without hesitation toward the defense table. "Him. The one with the gray hair and glasses. He got out and looked down at our car. I saw him from where I was hanging in my seatbelt. He talked on a phone and said, 'It's done,' before he drove away." The man she identified, Edward Branson, Centaur's operations director, visibly paled. His attorney immediately began whispering urgently in his ear, "Thank you, Lily. That was very brave." Hayes said, "I have no further questions, Your Honor." The defense attorney who rose for cross-examination had a reputation for aggressive questioning, but something in Max's steady gaze seemed to give him pause. His questions were pointed, but not hostile, focusing on whether Lily might have been confused by the trauma, whether she could really identify someone from such a distance. Lily's answers remained consistent, her initial tears now replaced by a steely determination that reminded Bob powerfully of Jessica. When the attorney attempted to suggest that perhaps her memories had been influenced by hearing adults discuss the case, Max shifted position slightly. The movement was subtle, a minor repositioning that nevertheless conveyed unmistakable protectiveness. "No further questions," the attorney concluded abruptly, returning to his seat with a troubled expression. As Lily left the witness stand, the dam finally broke. She made it through the gate separating the court from the gallery before collapsing against Bob's legs, silent sobs shaking her small frame. Max pressed against her, offering his solid warmth while Martha stroked Lily's hair. "Let's get her out of here," Bob murmured. Lifting his granddaughter into his arms, Hayes met them in the hallway, his expression both satisfied and concerned. "She did, beautifully," he said quietly. That testimony sealed Branson's fate. The jury saw exactly what kind of man would leave a mother and child to die at the bottom of a ravine. "At what cost?" Martha asked, her arms protectively around Lily. "The cost of truth," Hayes replied, his gaze softening as he looked at the exhausted child. "But she won't have to do it again. I promise." They drove home in silence, Lily falling into an exhausted sleep against Max's side in the back seat. The dog remained vigilant, his eyes occasionally meeting Bob's in the rearview mirror with an expression that seemed to say, "I've got her. She's safe now." It wasn't until they were nearly home that Martha spoke. "Do you think it was worth it making her relive that horror?" Bob considered the question carefully. "I think Jessica would have wanted the truth to come out. And I think Lily needed to tell it not just for the case, but for herself." He glanced again at the rearview mirror, at his sleeping granddaughter and her guardian. Some burdens are too heavy to carry alone. As they turned onto the long driveway leading to the ranch, the setting sun painted the landscape in shades of gold and amber. It should have been a peaceful homecoming, a moment of relief after the emotional ordeal of the day. Instead, Bob felt a prickle of unease as he noticed an unfamiliar car parked near their house. "Who's that?" Martha asked, leaning forward to peer through the windshield. Before Bob could answer, Max's sudden alert posture in the back seat told him everything he needed to know. Something was wrong. The dog's ears were forward, his body tense, a low growl building in his throat. "Stay in the car," Bob said quietly, pulling to a stop several yards from the house. "Lock the doors." Bob approached the unfamiliar sedan cautiously, aware of Martha's anxious gaze following him from the truck. The car was empty, its hood still warm to the touch. Someone had arrived recently and was likely inside their home. After the day's testimony, every instinct warned him of danger. He was reaching for his cell phone to call Sheriff Parker when the front door of the ranch house opened. A man in a dark suit stepped onto the porch, his hands raised slightly to show they were empty. "Mr. Thompson," the man called. "I'm Agent Donovan, FBI. We received information that there might be a security concern at your property." Bob hesitated, years of small-town caution making him wary of credentials that could be falsified. "Where's your partner? FBI agents usually travel in pairs." A flicker of approval crossed the man's face. "Good observation. Agent Reyes is circling the perimeter. We had reports of surveillance on your property, possibly Centaur contractors who haven't been apprehended yet." Before Bob could respond, Max's bark erupted from the truck. He turned to see the German shepherd standing at attention in the back seat, his posture rigid as he stared not at the agent on the porch, but toward the barn at the side of the property. Lily was awake now, her small face pressed against the window. Something in Max's alertness triggered Bob's instincts. "Show me your credentials again," he called to the man, moving slightly to keep both the agent and the barn in his line of sight. Agent Donovan reached slowly into his jacket and removed an FBI badge. Holding it up. "Sir, I'd feel more comfortable if you'd get back in your vehicle until we've secured the area." The badge looked genuine from this distance, but Max's continued alertness nagged at Bob. The dog had proven his instincts were trustworthy time and again. "Why don't you come over here and show me that badge up close?" Bob suggested, moving back toward the truck. The agent's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Sir, please remain where you are. We have reason to believe—" A gunshot cracked through the evening air, splintering the wood of the porch railing inches from where the supposed agent stood. The man dropped instantly, drawing a weapon from his shoulder holster and scanning for the source of the fire. "Federal agent, drop your weapon," a woman's voice commanded from the direction of the barn. The scene erupted into chaos. A second man emerged from inside the house, also armed. The first agent, or whoever he was, fired toward the barn, where Bob now saw a woman in a tactical vest using a tractor for cover. "Get down!" Bob shouted toward the truck, diving behind his own vehicle as bullets whizzed past. From his position, he could see Martha pulling Lily to the floor of the truck. Max was barking furiously, trying to force his way through the closed window. "Thompson!" the woman by the barn shouted. "Those men are not FBI Centaur contractors. Stay down." The firefight was brief but intense. The woman, presumably the real Agent Reyes, was joined by a male agent who emerged from behind the house. Their coordinated fire quickly drove the imposters back into the ranch house. "Thompson family secure," the male agent called out. "In the truck," Bob replied, keeping his head down. "Who are you people, really?" "Special Agent Marcus Donovan, FBI," the man responded, showing his badge as he moved in a crouch toward Bob's position. "That's my partner, Agent Reyes. We've been monitoring Centaur's remaining operatives. Intercepted communications suggested a hit on your family after today's testimony." Bob's blood ran cold. "Those men in my house—" Contractors, hired guns. Donovan's expression was grim. The real danger is still out there somewhere. Reyes only spotted these two by chance. Inside the truck, Max's barking had taken on a different quality, not alert now, but urgent. Warning. Bob looked up to see the dog's attention fixed on something beyond the house, toward the ridge that overlooked their property. "Sniper," Donovan hissed, following Bob's gaze. "Reyes high ground. 2 o'clock. The female agent immediately redirected her aim, but before she could fire, Max somehow managed to force the truck's window down, a trick he must have learned during his military service. The dog launched himself through the opening with fluid grace, hitting the ground running. "Max!" Lily screamed, her voice piercing the chaos. The German Shepherd moved with stunning speed, zigzagging across the open ground toward the ridge where the sniper was positioned. Gunfire erupted again, a different sound. The crack of a high-powered rifle. Dirt kicked up in Max's path, but the dog's evasive pattern kept him from being hit. "Cover the dog," Donovan ordered, laying down suppressive fire toward the house while Reyes targeted the ridge. Bob watched in horror and amazement as Max scaled the rocky incline, his powerful legs carrying him up terrain that would challenge most humans. The sniper fired again and missed. Seconds later, they heard a shout of pain and fear from the ridge. "He's got him," Reyes said incredulously. "The dog actually got to the sniper." The men inside the house, realizing their backup was compromised, attempted to flee out the back door only to be cut off by 2 more FBI agents who had arrived as reinforcements. Within minutes, the situation was contained 4 Centaur contractors in custody, including the sniper whom Max had incapacitated with a precision attack to the arm that had held the rifle. "Max!" Lily's voice called out repeatedly as she pressed against the truck window, searching for her protector. For a heart-stopping moment, there was no sign of the German Shepherd. Then, moving more slowly than before, Max appeared at the top of the ridge, even from a distance. Bob could see something was wrong. The dog's gait was uneven, labored. "He's hurt," Bob realized, his heart sinking. "Donovan, the dog's been hit." The agent looked up sharply. The sniper must have gotten a shot off. Max continued his descent, each step visibly painful. Despite his injury, his head remained high, his focus unwavering as he made his way back to Lily. By the time he reached level ground, his right side was darkened with blood, yet he continued forward with the same determination that had brought him to their door that first morning. "Let me out," Lily was crying now, fighting against Martha's restraining arms. "Max needs me." "Wait until the agents clear it," Martha insisted, though her own face was streaked with tears. Finally, Agent Reyes gave the signal. "Area secure. Medical team is 3 minutes out." Bob wrenched open the truck door, and Lily burst past him, running to where Max had finally collapsed in the dirt yard. The dog's breathing was labored, his amber eyes clouded with pain but still tracking Lily's approach. He managed to lift his head as she reached him, his tail stirring the dust in a weak wag. "No, no, no," Lily sobbed, falling to her knees beside him. "Max, please, don't leave me too." Bob knelt beside them, quickly assessing the damage. The bullet had caught Max in the shoulder, a serious wound, but not immediately fatal if they could get him treatment quickly. "He's going to need a veterinarian. Fast," he told Donovan, who was already on his radio requesting emergency medical support. "The team coming has a K-9 medic," the agent assured him. "Standard procedure when working with dogs in the field." Martha joined them, bringing clean towels from the truck. With gentle efficiency, she helped Bob apply pressure to Max's wound, her teacher's calm taking over in the crisis. "You hold on, Max," she murmured. "This family's not losing anyone else." Max's eyes never left Lily's face as they worked to stabilize him. The little girl had stopped crying, her expression transforming into the same determined focus the dog had shown. She cradled his head in her lap, whispering continuously in his ear. "You saved us again," she told him. "Now it's our turn to save you. Stay with me, Max. Please stay." The medical team arrived with sirens blaring an ambulance for the injured sniper and a specialized K-9 unit for Max. The veterinary medic worked quickly, establishing an IV line and administering emergency treatment before carefully loading Max into their vehicle. "I'm coming with him," Lily stated with absolute certainty, already climbing into the van beside Max's stretcher. "We'll be right behind you," Bob promised, knowing better than to argue, as the vehicles pulled away. Agent Donovan approached with a grim expression. "Mr. Thompson, there's something you need to know. The man posing as me, we've identified him. He was Centaur's head of security, discharged from military intelligence 5 years ago for ethical violations. This wasn't just about silencing a witness." He hesitated. "They found Jessica's missing cell phone in his possession." "What are you saying?" Bob asked, though a cold certainty was already forming in his gut. "The data on that phone completes the evidence trail. It proves the CEO of Centaur personally ordered both Jessica's death and Walker's." Donovan's eyes were solemn. They weren't just trying to eliminate Lily as a witness today. They were trying to recover the final piece of evidence that will put their boss away for life. Bob stared at the dust settling in the wake of the departing vehicles. All this time, Max was still completing his mission, he said quietly. "Finding justice for both Jessica and Walker. That dog is something else," Donovan agreed. "In 20 years with the Bureau, I've never seen anything like him." As Bob and Martha drove to the veterinary hospital, the sunset painted the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. The beauty seemed at odds with the violence they had just witnessed, yet somehow fitting for the blood that had been shed in pursuit of truth. "Do you think he'll make it?" Martha asked, her voice small in the gathering darkness. Bob thought of Max's unwavering determination, his absolute loyalty, the impossible journey that had brought him to their door with Jessica's secrets. If anyone can, it's him. But as they pulled into the hospital parking lot, the grim faces of the waiting medical team told them that even Max's extraordinary will might not be enough this time. 3 months later. The Thompson Ranch basked in the golden light of early autumn. The summer heat had finally broken, giving way to mornings crisp enough for sweaters and afternoons warm enough for short sleeves. On the front porch, a brand-new porch swing swayed gently in the breeze, its cedar boards still fragrant and bright against the weathered farmhouse. Lily sat cross-legged on the living room floor, a book open in her lap, her voice clear and confident as she read aloud. And the brave knight knew that true courage wasn't about never being afraid, but about doing what's right, even when you are scared. Beside her, stretched out on a plush dog bed that Martha had insisted on buying for those old bones of his, Max listened with attentive eyes, His coat had regained its luster in the months since the shooting, though a new scar marked his right shoulder, adding to the collection that mapped his extraordinary life. The military-grade protective vest that now hung by the door, a gift from Captain Reynolds, wouldn't be needed today. But its presence was a reminder of how close they had come to losing him. "You like that part, don't you?" Lily asked, pausing in her reading to stroke Max's head. The dog's tail thumped against the floor in agreement. From the kitchen doorway, Bob watched the pair with a warmth in his chest that still surprised him sometimes. The night at the veterinary hospital had been the longest of his life, longer even than the night they'd lost Jessica. For 6 hours. They had waited while a specialized team of surgeons worked to save Max, extracting the bullet that had shattered his shoulder blade and repairing the damage to muscle and tissue. "It's touch and go," the head surgeon had told them around midnight, her scrubs stained with Max's blood. "The blood loss was severe, and there's risk of infection. But he's fighting harder than any dog I've seen in 20 years of practice." Lily had refused to leave the hospital, curling up on a waiting room chair with her mother's photograph clutched to her chest. Sometime before dawn, Bob had found her whispering to the picture, "Please help Max stay with us, Mommy. I need him." Whether it was Jessica's intervention from beyond, the skilled medical team, or simply Max's indomitable spirit, the German Shepherd had pulled through. The road to recovery had been long weeks of antibiotics, physical therapy, and restricted movement that tested the patience of both dog and child. But through it all, their bond had only deepened, each helping the other heal in ways that went beyond the physical. "Mail's here," Martha announced, coming through the front door with a stack of envelopes. "There's another letter from that publishing company for Lily." Since Lily had begun speaking again, her natural storytelling abilities had emerged stories about a brave dog who solved mysteries and protected children, tales that Dr. Miller had encouraged her to write down as part of her therapy. When Sheriff Parker's wife, a children's librarian, had seen the stories, she'd sent them to her cousin who worked in publishing. The resulting interest had been unexpected, but welcome. "Can I open it?" Lily asked, setting aside her book. Max immediately sat up, as if the letter might contain news that concerned him too. "Go ahead. Lily Bean," Bob said, joining them in the living room. "Though I reckon we already know what it says." Lily carefully opened the envelope, her face serious as she read the contents. "They want to publish my stories about Max," she announced, though they had all known this was coming after the preliminary contract had arrived last week. "And they want pictures of the real Max for the book jacket." "Well, he is the handsomest dog in Arizona," Martha said with a smile. "Though I suppose we'll need to get him groomed before any photo shoots." Max gave her a look that seemed to question whether such grooming was really necessary, prompting a laugh from everyone. The sound of tires on gravel announced visitors, expected ones, judging by Max's relaxed posture. He moved to the window, tail wagging as Sheriff Parker's cruiser pulled up, followed by Captain Reynolds in his personal vehicle. "Right on time," Bob noted, checking his watch. Today was special, the formal military ceremony to honor Max's service that had been postponed until he was fully recovered. "I'll get the lemonade," Martha said, heading to the kitchen. "And tell Jim to wipe his boots. I just mopped that floor." The ceremony itself was modest but meaningful, held on the front lawn of the Thompson Ranch with just a small gathering the family. Sheriff Parker and his wife, Dr. Miller, Captain Reynolds, and a handful of military personnel who had worked with Walker and Max. Colonel Harris presided, his formal demeanor softened by the genuine respect in his voice as he recounted Max's service record. Military working dog ranger known to his family as Max served with distinction in operations that cannot be detailed here, but which saved American lives. The colonel stated, "His actions following the deaths of Handler Walker and Jessica Thompson demonstrated initiative, intelligence, and loyalty beyond what we train our canines to provide." Lily stood straight and tall beside Max, who sat at perfect attention despite the lingering stiffness in his shoulder. She wore her blue dress again no longer because it made her brave, but because it was special, like today. In recognition of extraordinary service, the United States military hereby awards the Honorary Combat Action Medal to Military Working Dog Ranger. Colonel Harris continued, presenting a framed medal and certificate to Lily. Additionally, the Thompson family is recognized with the Civilian Service Commendation for their role in bringing to justice those who would threaten our nation's security. After the ceremony, as the adults shared lemonade and Martha's famous apple pie, Lily led Max to the small memorial garden they had planted at the edge of the property. 2 simple stones stood side by side, one for Jessica Thompson, one for Thomas Walker. Fresh flowers brightened the space, and a small American flag stirred in the breeze. No one had told Lily to create this ritual of visiting the memorial with Max each day, but she had started it during his recovery and maintained it faithfully. Bob watched from a distance as his granddaughter spoke softly to the stones, her hand resting on Max's head. "She's going to be all right," Martha said, joining him. "They both are." "Thanks to that dog," Bob replied. "Never would have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, how an animal could change everything." Sheriff Parker approached, his expression thoughtful. "Federal prosecutor called this morning. Sentencing is next week for the Centaur executives. They're all going away for a long-time life sentences for the CEO and Branson." "Good," Bob said simply. Justice wouldn't bring Jessica back. But it mattered nonetheless for her memory, for Lily's future, for the integrity of a system that had ultimately worked as it should. Captain Reynolds joined them, nodding toward Lily and Max at the memorial. "Walker would be proud," he said quietly, "of both of them." Later, as the sun began to set, the visitors departed, leaving the family to their evening routine. Lily and Max took their customary place on the porch swing, watching as the landscape transformed in the fading light. Bob and Martha joined them, the 4 of them sitting together in comfortable silence. "Grandpa," Lily said after a while, her voice thoughtful, "do you think Max knew all along what he was doing when he came to our door that first day?" Bob considered the question, looking at the German shepherd who gazed back with those intelligent amber eyes. "I think he knew exactly what he was doing. Lily Bean, some things can't be explained by training alone." "He didn't just bring back Mommy's things," Lily said, wrapping her arm around Max's neck. "He brought back my voice, too." Max turned to lick her cheek once, his gesture gentle and deliberate, before settling his head on her lap with a contented sigh. In the distance, a coyote called a lonely sound that emphasized the warmth of the family gathered on the porch. "You know what my daddy used to say?" Martha offered, her voice soft in the gathering dusk. He'd say sometimes the good Lord works in mysterious ways, and sometimes those ways have 4 legs and a tail. Bob smiled, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Life would never be what it was before they lost Jessica. But here on this porch, with his wife beside him and his granddaughter finding joy again, he felt something he hadn't expected to feel after such lost hope. Max shifted slightly, his watchful gaze sweeping the property once before returning to Lily's face. Guardian, friend, healer. He was all these things, and more to the little girl who had offered him a sandwich when he was starving. In saving each other, they had saved the whole family. As darkness fell completely, Bob reached over to switch on the porch light. Its warm glow illuminated the 4 of them, an unlikely family forged through tragedy, but bound now by something stronger than blood, a love that had found them when they needed it most, delivered to their doorstep by a dog who refused to quit his mission until justice was served and hearts were healed. Time for bed. Lily Bean, he said gently. School tomorrow. Lily nodded, but made no move to rise, her fingers buried in Max's fur. Just a few more minutes, Grandpa. It's so peaceful. And so they sat a while longer, together in the quiet night, while Max kept his faithful watch over the family that had become his own, a promise fulfilled to 2 people who could no longer speak for themselves, and a new beginning for the little girl who had found her voice again. Folks, remember when America stood for something? When loyalty and courage weren't just words in a political speech, but values we lived by every day. Little Lily's story reminds us that in this troubled world, true heroes still exist, sometimes on 4 legs. This German shepherd, once a proud military dog, found his way to a broken family's doorstep, carrying more than evidence he brought hope. Like many of us who've weathered life's storms, Max bore scars both visible and hidden, yet his devotion never wavered. Isn't that what we all yearn for? Someone who stands by us when the world turns its back. Someone who fights for truth when it's easier to stay silent. In these days, when families are scattered and neighbors are strangers, Max and Lily's bond speaks to the America we remember, where communities rallied around the wounded, where justice prevailed over money and power, where a child's innocence was worth protecting at all costs. Their story isn't just about a dog and a little girl. It's about the country we love, the values we cherish, and the simple truth that sometimes the most profound healing comes from the most unexpected places. That's something worth remembering.